Okay, so day 6, I think. Still working through those courses. Got through the first intro on a 3D one. I'm going to keep cracking at them. Yeah, so my current thoughts are learning Godot and taking this time will be good because it will let me prototype. It will let me start to brainstorm and let me actually take a look at what I want to do, my base idea, the fundamental core of what I want to do, and really define that and refine the essence of that. That way I can make a design doc. And I have no clue how anybody else does this, but I know people use words like design doc when talking about projects. So I'm going to use the same word, but the document I'm talking about might have a different name when I'm done with it, because for me, it is the guiding light. It is the truth of what I want to do and why I want to do it, so that when I'm making decisions and I'm looking at what I've done, I can always turn back to that and say, do these things fit within this ethos and this principle? And I think it's going to be important to have something like that as I work on it. One, because it's a long-term project and I will change as a person over the course of it, but the vision for the project cannot change with me. Otherwise, it will never finish because it will always be changing. So there has to be that fundamental foundation to look at as I change as a person and my interests change as a person and my knowledge and skill sets change as a person, so that I can look at that on day 365 and still be able to follow the same core tenets as day 1. So learning Godot, the next, I'm guessing 10 weeks to 4 to 5 months to go through all those courses, really dig into it and just let it cook, and then start putting, not just let it cook, but record the recipe. Start to get all the ideas down, the feelings I have, because that's the problem with lots of things is they're feelings, but they're not concrete, thought out ideas yet. And feelings are great. And feelings are always exciting, but when they are exposed to the facts of ideation and clarification, they tend to need more. And it's hard to get to the root of why you feel a certain way about things. That's not an easy thing to do, especially if it's about yourself, being honest about the true reason behind why you like something, and all the aspects of it, because it's not a binary like, dislike, and only one thing contributes to that. It's a spectrum of things, and those feelings are a spectrum of feelings. I'm gonna work on that while I work on this other stuff. Some of those design ideas, the reason why I think this is going to be important is because I started playing V Rising, just came out in 1.0, and I played it back in its early access. And the thing that I loved about the game when I first picked it up was that you play as a vampire. It's implicit throughout. You get hurt by sunlight. There's a day-night cycle. Don't really need that in that game. You could just have it always be night, and then you just auto sleep. But there's a day-night cycle. You can get hurt if you're in the sunlight, and you find ways to get around it. But the level design is built around that concept because there's lots of forest. There's lots of large shadows, light and shadows for you to play in. So even at a low level, you're not just waiting around during the day, waiting for night. You're jumping from shadow to shadow, being that vampire. And that sells you the fantasy of the low-level vampire. And when you get into a higher level, you can kind of ignore all that stuff. You get shape-shifting forms and other ways to deal with sunlight that it becomes less of a thing. And now this thing that could have been just an annoyance. Like some games, there's a mechanic in a game and it's a chore. And this could have been something like that, but it's not, because of the way that it was designed. And all those design principles, all those things that you do in that game are so much less of a chore because they are all built around that fundamental idea that you are a vampire in a vampire game. I think about when people talk about old video games and how they would try to find memory for them, or have to build the games out of such limited parameters. And so they would come up with all these novel ways to work within the constraints of what they're doing. Those kind of roadblocks, when you work with them instead of just ignore them, I think really help develop interesting and noteworthy designs. But tie it all back together here. So having that master design document, having something like V Rising, but not in the style portion, but in the design portion, like the ethos of how to think about when I'm adding things into the game. Think about V-Rising and how does this play into the master ethos of what the game is? How does it add to it? And then there's what is the game? The original idea was just a marble maze. And it would be simple was the other thing I was thinking about, because I was like, oh, I'm going to make a first thing, do the simple thing. And so, a marble maze. Now my idea is if you do a marble maze that has a narrative story that is told Dark Souls style in a roguelite, that's my new idea. And what I mean by that is it would be a puzzle game where there would be multiple solutions to the puzzle depending on what kind of resources you have to bring to bear. And this is where it all falls apart, because then it's like, what does that look like? I don't have a clue. I've never seen this before. And then the roguelite is like the solution, the way that you can get to a solution would change, also depending on the resources. So it would be a puzzle that could be solved multiple different ways with multiple different solutions depending on what kind of resources you had or how you played it. In theory, we'll see. And then the story would be that the game you're playing comes from your wizard grandfather. So like you're sick in bed and he brings you this game, and then there'd be like the opening cutscene, and then you play the game, and then all the physics and the effects would all be, because it's a magical puzzle box. And then the story is that the grandfather is a powerful wizard who's hiding his spell book inside the puzzle. And so as you're going through playing the puzzles, the theme of each stage would be elemental based on magic. And so like if the first one was like the Green Hills Zone, that would be wind. And so all the puzzles would be wind related. And then in the next, so you'd have like 5 stages of wind puzzles, and then like a final boss puzzle. And then you'd go to the next stage, and the next stage might be fire. And so then you'd still have wind, some of those wind mechanics and wind ideas, except now there'd be fire being added into it. And then ideally you'd be able to take fire back into the wind portion, and that would open different pathways. And that's why like the idea of V-Rising, where it's a game where the theme permeates the design. With this having that theme and that story permeate the design helps make those choices, and then it makes them a cohesive choice. At least that's the initial idea. And that's also why I think doing these Godot courses will give me time to cook that idea and let it bake and let me work out different aspects of it and kind of just put together some documentation and some ideas, some concrete ideas in a way that isn't just feelings that I have about a thing that I'm thinking about or imagining about, but actually like articulate them so they can be shared. Because then if I can share them, then I can ask my wife, hey, here's an idea I'm having. What do you think? And I can get her thoughts on it. And she'll be able to give me a biased judge of what she thinks about things. She'll also be able to give me good ideas and directions and ways to start to think about changing things and places to like add to, which I think will be important, because I think the style of the game, because it's a puzzle game where the frustration, the tension comes from one's ability to, one, perform this dexterity game of moving a marble by tilting a plane, and 2, by moving it into a precise location that may or may not be easy to get to with a certain ability or power, making it a dexterity game that you might be able to get to the easiest exit in like 10 seconds, but maybe getting to that exit with fire is exponentially harder. It's like that kind of thing. But I think the style, like the look and feel of it, is really going to help create the ability for that tension to be lived with. Will be part of the reason why you can live with it. So if you can't get past a puzzle, or if you're struggling with getting past a certain part where you have to be very dexterous, then hopefully the visuals will be calming enough and chill enough that you want to keep coming back to it. It will look good enough, at least in its own stylized way, that you want to come back to it. And that means figuring out the look, and not just like figuring it out and saying this is the look, but actually making the look in the engine on a level. I can't just sketch it out on a piece of paper and know that I can fill that sketch in when I get there in a later date, and I just have to start to put together the pieces so I can then make the thing. If it was a sculpture, I would collect all the reference photos, and then I would just get the clay, and there we go. After a long enough time, it will look like the thing. You just chip away at it, and eventually it's there. It's clay. It's forgiving. No worries. But I can't do that because I've never used this form of clay before because it's a game. So I have to make a finished thing. Well, not finished because it's not going to be finished until the whole thing's finished. But I need a slice, a test of what it looks like so I can see what I can do, honestly. If the first level is about wind, but I don't know how to make a wind effect, and I don't know how to use wind to can't make things sway and move with the wind, then I need to figure something the fuck else out, because that's just not going to work, right? I mean, pretty simple. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. We'll see. It's only day 6. But yeah,